Hello, this is a short video tutorial about using backstitch in cross stitch. I'm going to use backstitch for one of three reasons really in cross stitch. The first one is outlining, and if you look at this teddy here you can see that there's a crisp black outline all the way around the outside of the teddy, and that's done using backstitch. The second use we're going to look at is for adding detail and definition within the design. So if you look at this teddy, you can see an example of that as well around his muzzle, and here you can see I've done a little backstitch line to show where his arms go, and around his feet and around his eyes, and it gives definition. So it's also outlining really, it's just outlining in another form. It's within the design rather than around the outside of the design. This owl here, some designs have very little backstitch. This owl here, for example, don't know whether you can see, all the backstitch he has is a couple of a little V shape there to define his beak here in black. Other than that, there's no backstitch on that owl at all. So those are two uses, outlining the outside and drawing lines within the design to give a bit more definition. The third one is for lettering. Here is an example of backstitch lettering. The Merry Christmas at the bottom there is backstitch lettering, and it's done with a double thickness of thread. Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of how we do that. Let's start with outlining. Here's a block of yellow stitches, and I'm going to outline them with a single thread of a nice bright blue for contrast. First thing we do is we secure the thread at the back of our work. We've got this block of stitches, so all we need to do is pass our needle through and behind a row of stitches there and pull it through, but not obviously all the way through, and then go back a couple of times, maybe in another place, different place, and then if we tug that gently we'll see it's pretty secure. So we're going to backstitch around this block. As the name implies, the stitch involves going back on yourself. You're overlapping. It could maybe be better called overlap stitch. So I've come up, I brought my thread up through this hole here, which is just one hole up from the end. I'm going to put my thread back down through the hole below. Then I'm going to bring it up through the next hole above and come back to the hole below. Up through the next hole. Oh, I've managed to do a knot, that's annoying. There you go. Sometimes you can just pull knots like that through. Glad that happened. And back in this one. I don't really want to start again. This is my second attempt because I was using the wrong camera. I had the phone facing the other way around, so I had the weaker camera lens pointing at the work and it could not cope with the close-up. So I've started again. So up through the next hole, back down through that hole. And so on all the way around. So up through the next hole, back through the original hole, up through the next hole, back through the last hole. And there we are, we've gone all the way around. So what we need to do now is secure our thread on the back in a very similar way to the way we started. We're going to be going underneath a few stitches here and there. Sometimes I like to kind of turn it around and go back the other direction. You can overdo it. I've gone through 3 different little areas there, so now I've finished, so I will snip it off. And there we are, all neatly outlined. Let's look now at lettering. more often than not, and certainly on most of my patterns and kits, the lettering that we do uses a double thread. And that's really handy because it means there's a neat way to start your work without having to rely on having a patch of stitches nearby to secure your work to. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a single thread, like this long single thread here, put the two ends together. It's a bit longer than we need, but never mind. Two ends together, give them a little bit of wet, and thread both of these ends. I'm not telling you where the wet came from. Thread both of these ends through the needle. If you struggle with that, you can always use a needle threader like this. I had it ready in case, but it went through quite neatly. So I've pulled that through a little way, and I've effectively got now a loop on the other end of the thread. So I'm going to form a letter A down here, and I'm going to bring my needle up, leave the loop there on the back. Then I'm going to go back down, and I'm going to bring the needle thread through, and I'm going to pass the needle and the thread through this loop here, effectively anchoring it. Give it a nice tug, not a proper pull, just a tug so that it's taut. And there I've done two things at once. I've made my first stitch and I've anchored the thread behind. Neat. So I'm now going to go ahead and form my letter A. So I'm going to go up here. So I'm forming the stitches in exactly the same way. Now you've got two threads in your needle, double the potential for tangling, so do keep an eye. You'll soon realise if it's tangled behind, you'll be able to feel it with this finger, but also you'll suddenly notice that the thread you've got coming through is shorter than you expected it to be. So I'm going to do quite a tall A. Let's go up one more. And then I'm going to do a diagonal for the top of the A. So up in the next hole and then back into the hole we've just used. Keep going round for my A, diagonal of my A. And down the other side. Couple more. Ahead and back. And forwards and backwards. And you can see what I meant by overlapping. On the back you can see that overlapping effect of the stitches that we've done. But this is the right side and it's a single line of stitches. And I want to do the cross piece of my A. Now I don't know if you can see, if I move this thread around, you can see the thread through the holes, can't you? We really do want to try and avoid being able to see the thread through the holes at the back. Sometimes it's very difficult to avoid it, but there are ways you can do. So I want to do a cross piece here. So I'm certainly not just going to put my needle up through here, because if I did that, and I'll do it, you can see a shadow. You can see there's some threads visible there. Now I've made life difficult for myself, haven't I? Because I've got to rethread my needle. And it might not be quite as straightforward as it was the first time. Phew. Okay. So I want to do a cross piece across here. So I need to get my thread ready to come out of this hole. So I'm going to wiggle it underneath these few stitches here until I get to the point, till I get the thread behind the point where I want to come up. So there we are. So that's nice and neat. So I've come up there. You may have noticed there that I've just done a forward stitch when I'm doing back stitches. Sometimes your first stitch does go forwards and then you kind of catch up with yourself going backwards. So there's the A, all done. And I want to secure my thread off behind it. I may want to carry on and do the next letter here. So just like I said before with the cross piece, we need to think about where you have your thread behind. If I were doing that, I would engineer it so that I probably ended my stitch here, so that I could just go across here behind quite close to do my next letter, and there was no great expanse of this thread showing behind like it is there now. Anyway, I'm not going to do another one now, so I'm just going to go ahead and secure my thread off underneath by going behind through a few of these stitches and then carefully snipping off my thread nice and close. Lovely. So there's that. Occasionally a pattern might call for you to do a single thread. Just pulled that needle out. Might call for you to do a single thread piece of back stitching in the middle of nowhere with no nothing for you to secure your thread off to. So here's how you're going to do that. So bring your thread up through the hole, leave a tail. Let's pull that. There we go. I've left a tail. Now all I'm going to do now is I'm going to form my back stitches in the same way as I have just been doing, but I'm going to trap this underneath. It's fiddly. It means you've got to keep looking, turning your work over and finding your little back tail and trapping it down each time. So let's come up here. Let's have a look. Is that gonna, well, the first one can't really trap it. Let's make another stitch. Careful not to pull it through too hard. Okay, now this time I can have a look and I can make sure that I tuck that little end through that stitch I've just made so that it catches it down. So it's caught it down like that. And I would do a couple more. So ready to go up the next stitch, and this time, there's my loop, I'm gonna, pulled him through too much. Pull it out a bit. It's because I'm using a tiny bit of thread. Pull that through there. There we are, that's now through that loop, and it will get caught underneath. And I would probably want to do one more, just to make sure he's properly caught down. Where is it? I'm finding using another needle helpful here. To pull it through to make sure it's caught down. Oh no, that one isn't, is it? Do you know what? This is why I very, very rarely do. I don't think any of my patterns require you to use a single thread and do backstitch in the middle of nowhere. Okay. So you can probably see, can you see through that hole there? Can you see there's a little bit of darkness behind? That's that little end there. So this is why it's really important to trim those ends off. These are brilliant little trimmers. Trim that end off as close to the back as you can. There we are. Without snipping any of the vital threads. Okay, I'm not going to go on and finish that A. You've got the idea. So there are those 3 different ways to backstitch. Outlining, lettering with a double thread, lettering with a single thread. If, like on the teddy I showed you at the beginning, you're going to do some outlining here, it's exactly the same principle. It's just fiddlier because you're bringing the thread up between stitches that already exist rather than just round the outside of a stitch. So it's just a little bit more tricky and fiddly. I hope you found that helpful. See you next time.